The blood hadn't dried yet when she found him standing in the rain outside the hospital where she worked night shifts as a trauma nurse. Aurelia Sinclair had seen plenty of violence roll through the emergency room doors at 3 in the morning, but nothing quite like the man who stood beneath the flickering streetlight with crimson streaking down his face and soaking into the collar of what had once been an expensive white shirt. His hair was white as bone, his skin just as pale, and when he turned to look at her through the downpour, his eyes were the color of winter ice shot through with something ancient and utterly inhuman. She should have been afraid. Every instinct should have told her to run back inside, lock the doors, call security. Instead, she found herself walking toward him, with her umbrella raised and her coat growing heavy with rain. "You're hurt," she said, which was perhaps the most obvious statement she'd ever made in her entire 26 years of life. His mouth curved slightly at the corner, not quite reaching a smile. "Not my blood." Aurelia stopped a few feet away, suddenly very aware that she was alone in a hospital parking lot at 3:45 in the morning with a man covered in someone else's blood. "Then whose blood is it?" "People who deserve to bleed." His voice was low, accented with something old that she couldn't place. Eastern European, maybe, or older than that. Old enough that the language he'd first learned probably wasn't spoken anymore. She should have run, she should have screamed. Instead, she said, "You look like you could use some help cleaning up." Something flickered across his face then, something vulnerable beneath the regal bearing in the blood and the ancient eyes. He looked at her like she'd offered him something far more valuable than a washcloth and some warm water. Like she'd offered him something he'd forgotten existed. "You're not afraid," he said, and it wasn't a question. "I'm terrified," Aurelia admitted. "But you're standing in the rain looking lost and I'm a nurse. It's basically hardwired into me to help people who need it." "I'm not people." "No," she agreed, studying the way the rain seemed to avoid him just slightly, the way shadows clung to him like living things. "I don't suppose you are." He moved then, faster than her eyes could track, and suddenly he was standing directly in front of her, close enough that she could see her reflection in his pale eyes. Close enough that she should have been able to feel his breath on her face, except he wasn't breathing at all. "Do you know what I am?" he asked softly. "I have a pretty good idea," Aurelia said, proud that her voice stayed steady. "Though I didn't think vampires were real until about 30 seconds ago, so I'm still processing. And yet you offered to help me." "The offer stands," she said. "Unless you're planning to kill me, in which case I'd like to formally withdraw it and possibly scream." That got an actual smile from him, brief but genuine. "I'm not going to kill you. I'm Oisin Kadmiel. I'm a king, though my kingdom is one you didn't know existed until 30 seconds ago." He paused, studying her face like he was memorizing it. "And I would very much like to accept your offer, Aurelia Sinclair." She didn't ask how he knew her name. She was already accepting vampires were real. Telepathy or enhanced senses seemed like a minor additional stretch. Instead, she gestured toward the staff entrance. "Come on then. There's a staff bathroom on the 3rd floor that's usually empty this time of night. We can get you cleaned up before anyone asks questions I don't know how to answer." Oisin followed her inside, moving through the fluorescent-lit hallways like a ghost, or like royalty surveying a domain that existed far beneath his notice. People they passed didn't seem to see him, their eyes sliding away like he was wrapped in shadow and suggestion. Only Aurelia could see him clearly, and she wondered if that was his choice or something else entirely. The bathroom was exactly where she'd promised, small and institutional with harsh lighting that made the blood on his face look even more shocking against his white skin. Aurelia locked the door behind them and turned to find him watching her in the mirror, though she could see his reflection just fine, which meant at least one piece of vampire mythology was complete nonsense. "You can see yourself," she observed, moving to the sink to wet several paper towels with warm water. "Most of what humans believe about my kind is wrong," Oisin said. "We have reflections. We can touch silver. Garlic is simply unpleasant, not deadly. But the sun will kill us, and we do require blood to survive. Those parts are true." Aurelia turned to face him with the wet paper towels in hand. "Did you kill someone tonight?" Several someones, he said calmly. They were trying to start a war between my people and another vampire court. They'd kidnapped 3 of my subjects and were planning to make it look like the other court was responsible. I prevented that. By killing them. By executing them, he corrected. There's a difference. I'm a king. Justice falls under my responsibilities. She should have been horrified. She should have called the police or run, or done literally anything other than step closer to him with the paper towels extended. Hold still, she said instead. Oisin went completely motionless, which was somehow more unnatural than movement, like watching a statue breathe. Aurelia reached up carefully and began wiping the blood from his face, starting with his forehead and working her way down. The blood came away easily, revealing sharp aristocratic features that could have been carved from marble. High cheekbones, a strong jaw, a mouth that probably made people write poetry when he wasn't covered in the evidence of violence. You could have cleaned yourself, she said quietly, focusing on a particularly stubborn spot near his temple. You didn't need my help. No, Oisin agreed. I could have returned to my court and let servants attend to me. That's what a king does. That's what I've done for longer than your country has existed. Then why are you here? His hand came up to catch her wrist, gentle but unmovable. Because when you offered, something in your voice reminded me what it was like to be cared for rather than served. To be seen as Oisin rather than King Kadmiel. I haven't felt that in centuries. Aurelia's breath caught. His hand was cool against her skin, but not cold. Not dead, just different. I don't even know you. Not yet, he said. But you offered me kindness anyway. That's rare, especially for what I am. She started cleaning his face again, and he let his hand fall away. They didn't speak as she worked, wiping away the blood from his cheeks, his jaw, the elegant column of his throat. The intimacy of it was staggering, this small act of care for a man who was actually a king who could probably kill her without effort. When his face was clean, she stepped back to survey her work. He looked different without the blood, younger somehow, though his eyes remained ancient. Beautiful in a way that was almost painful to look at directly. Your shirt's ruined, she observed. I don't suppose you can magic up a new one. I could compel someone to give me theirs, Oisin offered, but that seems excessive. Aurelia found herself smiling despite the absolute insanity of the situation. Wait here. I have an ex-boyfriend's shirt in my locker that he never picked up. It won't be kingly, but it'll be less blood-soaked. She expected him to argue, to say something about his dignity or his station. Instead, he just nodded and said, "Thank you." When she returned 5 minutes later with a plain black t-shirt that had once belonged to a man she'd stopped thinking about months ago, Oisin had stripped off his ruined shirt and was washing his hands in the sink. The sight of him shirtless nearly made her drop the clean clothes. He was built like violence and grace combined, all lean muscle and pale skin marked with scars that should have been impossible for someone with vampiric healing. He caught her staring and raised an eyebrow. The scars are old. From before I was turned. They stay with us. The wounds we carried into immortality. How old are you? Aurelia asked, handing him the shirt. 3,047 years, give or take a decade. Record-keeping was inconsistent when I was human. He pulled the shirt on, and even in borrowed casual clothes, he managed to look regal. How old are you? 26, she said, which suddenly feels very young. You're not young. You're alive. There's a difference. Oisin moved closer, and the bathroom suddenly felt much smaller. Can I ask you something? You're a 3,000-year-old vampire king. I feel like I can't really say no. You can always say no to me, he said seriously. That's important. You always have a choice, Aurelia. The way he said her name sent shivers down her spine. What do you want to ask? Why aren't you afraid? And please don't tell me it's because you're a nurse. I've lived long enough to know that courage and profession aren't the same thing. Aurelia thought about it, really considered the question. I think, she said slowly, it's because you were standing in the rain, looking like the loneliest person I'd ever seen. And I know loneliness. I know what it's like to be surrounded by people and still feel completely isolated. When you looked at me, I recognized that. So no, I'm not afraid. Maybe I should be, but mostly I just feel sad for you." Something shifted in his expression, some wall crumbling that had probably stood for centuries. "I came here tonight because I didn't want to go home. Because even after delivering justice, even after protecting my people, I knew I'd walk into my palace and feel nothing but the weight of 3,000 years of isolation." He reached out slowly, giving her time to pull away, and brushed his fingers against her cheek. "Then you appeared in the rain like something from a dream I'd forgotten I used to have." "I'm not a dream," Aurelia whispered. "I'm just a trauma nurse who works too many night shifts and hasn't had a date in 6 months." "You're not just anything," Oisin said. "You're the first person in longer than I can remember who's seen me as something other than a weapon or a throne. You're extraordinary." Her heart was hammering hard enough that she knew he could hear it. "You don't know me." "Then let me," he said. "Let me know you. I want to understand what it means to be seen." She should have said no. Should have told him this was crazy, that she had a shift to finish and a life that didn't include vampire kings and blood-soaked shirts and conversations in hospital bathrooms at 4 in the morning. Instead, she found herself saying, "My shift ends at 7. There's a diner 2 blocks from here that serves breakfast. Do vampires eat food, or is that another myth?" "We can eat," Oisin said, and his smile was like sunrise, even though sunrise would kill him. "We don't need to, but we can. I would very much like to have breakfast with you, Aurelia." "Okay," she said. "Okay. But you have to promise me something. Anything. No more killing people while we're getting to know each other. I have enough trauma in the ER without dating someone who executes people." "I'm not sure 4 hours qualifies as dating," Oisin said, but his eyes were warm with something that might have been joy. "But I promise, no executions while we're together. Scout's honor." "Were you actually a scout?" "I was a warrior before I was turned," he said. "Close enough." Aurelia laughed, which should have been impossible given the circumstances, and unlocked the bathroom door. "I need to finish my shift. Can you entertain yourself for 3 hours without causing an international incident or whatever it is vampire kings cause?" "I'll manage," Oisin promised. "I'm very good at lurking in shadows." "Of course you are," she said. Then, feeling bold and possibly insane, she stood on her toes and kissed his cheek. "Thank you for letting me help you." Before he could respond, she slipped out of the bathroom and headed back to the emergency department, her heart still racing and her mind spinning with the impossibility of everything that had just happened. Behind her, she could feel his eyes following her, protective and possessive in a way that should have felt threatening, but instead felt like safety. The rest of her shift passed in a blur of patience and paperwork, but Aurelia's attention kept drifting to the shadows in corners, half expecting to see pale skin and white hair watching her work. She didn't see him, but she felt him there, a presence just out of sight that made her feel less alone than she had in months. When 7 o'clock finally arrived, she changed out of her scrubs in the locker room, pulling on jeans and a sweater that she'd worn to work 12 hours earlier. She didn't bother with makeup beyond some lip gloss from the bottom of her bag, because what was the point of prettying up for someone who'd seen her at her most raw and real? Oisin was waiting for her outside the staff entrance, looking impossibly elegant in the borrowed t-shirt. The sun hadn't risen yet, but the sky was beginning to lighten in the east, and she saw him glance at it with something that might have been longing. "Do you miss it?" she asked as they started walking toward the diner. "The sun. Every single day," he admitted. "I was turned at noon on the summer solstice. The last thing I saw as a human was the sun at its highest point. I've never forgotten how it felt on my skin." "I'm sorry," Aurelia said, and meant it. "Don't be. I've had 3,000 years of starlight and moonlight and the kind of darkness that humans never get to truly see. I've watched civilizations rise and fall, seen wonders that no longer exist, loved people who've been dust for millennia. The sun is a loss, but it's not the only light in the world." They reached the diner just as the first drops of rain started falling again. Inside, it was warm and bright and smelled like coffee and bacon. The waitress, a middle-aged woman named Donna who knew Aurelia by name, showed them to a booth by the window without comment about Oisin's unusual appearance. "Coffee?" Donna asked, already pouring a cup for Aurelia. "Please," Oisin said, though Aurelia suspected it was more for appearances than any actual desire for caffeine. When they were alone with menus, they weren't really reading, Aurelia said. "Tell me about your life, the parts that won't give me nightmares anyway." Oisin set down his menu and leaned back in the booth, studying her with those ancient ice-blue eyes. "I was born in what you'd now call Greece, though it wasn't called that then. I was a prince, which is probably why being a king seemed like a natural progression after I was turned. I died in battle defending my city from invaders. A vampire named Selene found me bleeding out on the battlefield and offered me a choice: die with honor or live forever with power. You chose power. I chose more," he corrected. "More time, more life, more possibility. I didn't understand what I was giving up, but I don't regret it. Selene taught me what I needed to know, helped me build my strength, and then released me to make my own way in the world. I spent centuries wandering, learning, fighting when I needed to. Eventually, I gathered others like me, vampires who wanted structure and safety. We built a court, established laws, created a civilization beneath the human one. And now you're king of that civilization." "One of several kings," Oisin said. "There are multiple vampire courts around the world, each with its own ruler and territory. We try to coexist peacefully, but tensions arise. Hence the executions you asked me to abstain from." Donna returned to take their orders. Aurelia got pancakes and eggs. Oisin ordered something called the Greek breakfast that made Aurelia wonder if he was feeling nostalgic. When they were alone again, she said, "What's your court like?" "Magnificent," he said simply. "We live beneath the city in spaces humans don't know exist. Old subway tunnels that were abandoned and forgotten, natural caverns that predate the city itself, chambers we've carved from bedrock over centuries. It's beautiful in a way sunlight never reaches. All shadow and candlelight and architecture that remembers older times." "It sounds lonely," Aurelia said softly. Oisin's expression flickered. "It is. Power is isolating. Everyone who approaches me wants something or fears me. Genuine connection is nearly impossible when you're a king. Even other vampires keep their distance, unsure if they're speaking to Oisin or to the crown I wear." "I don't know anything about crowns," Aurelia said. "I just know you looked sad in the rain." "You see too much," Oisin said, but he was smiling. Their food arrived, and they ate in comfortable silence for a while. Aurelia watched Oisin navigate pancakes with the same regal bearing he probably brought to vampire politics, and found herself charmed by the absurdity of it. "Can I ask you something personal?" she ventured. "You've already asked me about my age, my diet, and my loneliness," Oisin pointed out. "I don't think we have much personal left to protect. Have you ever been in love? In 3,000 years, has there been someone who made you feel less alone?" His fork paused halfway to his mouth. "Yes," he said finally. "Twice. Once when I was newly turned and still remembered what it meant to be human. She was another vampire, fierce and wild and utterly fearless. We had 50 years together before she walked into the sun. She said immortality without purpose was just prolonged dying, and she'd found her purpose and completed it. I couldn't argue with her choice, but it broke something in me." "And the second time?" Aurelia asked gently. "A human man, about 700 years ago. A scholar who studied ancient languages and accidentally stumbled onto references to my court. I revealed myself to him rather than have him killed for knowing too much. We had 20 years together before age took him from me. I offered to turn him, but he refused. He said mortality was what made life precious." Oisin set down his fork and looked directly at Aurelia. "I've loved twice in 3,000 years, and both times I lost them. You learn to be careful with your heart after that." "Or you learn that the risk is worth it," Aurelia said. 20 years of love sounds better than centuries of loneliness. You're very wise for 26. "I'm a trauma nurse," she said. "You learn pretty quickly that life is short and precious, and you should grab happiness wherever you find it." Oisin reached across the table and took her hand, his cool fingers threading through hers. Is that what this is? Happiness? I think it could be, Aurelia said, if we let it. They stayed in the diner until the sun had fully risen and Oisin was starting to look uncomfortable. Not burned or hurt, but tense, like he could feel the daylight pressing against the walls even though they were safely inside. I need to go, he said reluctantly. The sun won't kill me instantly, but it's not pleasant, and I'd rather not find out how long it takes. When can I see you again? The words were out before Aurelia could stop them, desperate and vulnerable in a way that made her want to take them back, but Oisin's expression softened into something achingly tender. Tonight? Tomorrow night? Every night for as long as you'll have me? That's a lot of nights, Aurelia said, her heart racing. I'm hoping for an infinite number of them, Oisin said. But I'll start with tonight if that's all you're willing to give me. They exchanged phone numbers, which felt absurdly normal given everything else, and Oisin kissed her hand with old-world courtesy before disappearing into the early morning shadows. Aurelia watched him go, then walked home to her tiny apartment in a daze, wondering if she'd just had the strangest shift of her life or if she'd actually met someone who could change everything. She slept through the day and woke up at 4 p.m. to a text message from an unknown number. I keep thinking about how gentle your hands were when you cleaned the blood from my face. No one has touched me like that in longer than I can calculate. Thank you for seeing me, Aurelia. I'll be at your door at sunset if you'll have me. Aurelia read the message 3 times, then typed back, I'll be ready. Wear something nice. I'm taking you on a proper date. His response came immediately. You're taking me on a date? I'm taking you on a date, she confirmed. You might be a king, but I'm not a subject. If we're doing this, we're doing it as equals. There was a longer pause before his next message arrived. I've been waiting 3,000 years for someone to speak to me like that. I'll see you at sunset, Aurelia Sinclair. Wear something that makes you feel beautiful, because I intend to spend the evening staring at you. She spent the next 3 hours getting ready with a level of care she hadn't bothered with in months. She showered and dried her hair, applied makeup with actual skill instead of her usual rushed attempt, and pulled on a dark green dress that hugged her curves and made her feel confident. When the knock came at her door precisely at sunset, she was ready. Oisin stood in the hallway, wearing dark slacks and a white button-down that made his pale hair and skin look even more striking. He was holding a bouquet of night-blooming jasmine, which must have cost a fortune this time of year. You're beautiful, he said simply. So are you, Aurelia replied, taking the flowers. Come in. I need to put these in water before we go. He followed her into her small apartment, and she was suddenly very aware of how modest her home was compared to the underground palace he'd described, but Oisin didn't seem to notice or care. He looked around with genuine interest, studying her bookshelves and the photos on her walls like they were artifacts in a museum. This is you, he said, gesturing to a photo of Aurelia at her nursing school graduation, flanked by her parents who'd driven 5 hours to attend. You look happy. I was, Aurelia said, arranging the jasmine in a vase. That was a good day. What about you? Do you have any photos from the past 3,000 years? Photography hasn't been around that long, Oisin said with a slight smile. But I have portraits, sketches, memories. Perhaps I'll show you sometime. I'd like that, Aurelia said. She set the vase on her kitchen counter and turned to face him. Ready? Where are you taking me? Oisin asked, offering his arm with courtly grace. There's an art gallery downtown that's open late on Thursdays, Aurelia said, taking his arm. They're featuring an exhibit on ancient civilizations. I thought you might enjoy correcting all their historical inaccuracies. Oisin laughed, a genuine sound of delight that transformed his face. That's possibly the best date idea anyone has ever had. You're remarkable. The gallery was everything Aurelia had hoped for. They wandered through rooms filled with artifacts and paintings, while Oisin provided commentary that no history book could match. He'd seen some of the pieces when they were new, knew the people depicted in the portraits, could describe the actual events that had inspired various historical accounts. That battle never happened, he said, studying a dramatic painting of ancient warriors. Or rather, it happened, but not like that. The artist was working 200 years after the fact based on stories that had been exaggerated in the retelling. The actual battle was smaller, messier, and far less glorious. "Were you there?" Aurelia asked. "I fought in it," Oisin confirmed. "I was human then, barely 20 years old and convinced I was immortal in the way only young men can be. I nearly died. Actually, I did die, just not in that battle. A few weeks later, in a different fight." They moved on to a display of ancient jewelry, and Oisin went very still in front of a gold necklace with intricate metalwork. "I gave one almost exactly like that to the woman I loved," he said quietly. "The vampire I told you about. She wore it every day for 50 years. I don't know what happened to it after she walked into the sun. Maybe it burned with her. Maybe it's in a museum somewhere. Either way, it's lost to me." Aurelia squeezed his hand. "Tell me about her. What was she like?" "Fire and fury," Oisin said. "She'd been a warrior queen before she was turned, and she never stopped being regal. She taught me that strength and gentleness weren't opposites, that you could be deadly and kind at once. When she decided her time was done, she did it with the same fierce grace she'd brought to everything else. I couldn't be angry at her for choosing her own ending." "But you were sad," Aurelia said. "Devastated," he admitted. "I didn't think I'd survive it, but vampires are hard to kill, even by heartbreak. Eventually the pain dulled, and I kept going because that's what you do. You endure." They spent 2 more hours in the gallery, talking and laughing and existing in a space where the outside world didn't matter. When they finally emerged back onto the street, the night was cold and clear, the kind of winter evening where every star seemed impossibly bright. "Are you hungry?" Oisin asked. "I know a place that serves excellent food, though I should warn you, it's a vampire establishment. You'd be safe," he added quickly. "You'd be with me, and no one would dare touch someone under my protection. But I understand if you'd rather not." "I want to see your world," Aurelia said. "If you're willing to show me." Oisin's expression shifted into something fiercely protective and proud at once. "Then I'll show you everything." He led her to a part of the city she didn't know well, industrial and mostly abandoned, the kind of area that urban developers kept promising to revitalize but never quite got around to. They descended a fire escape into what looked like a basement, then through a door that Aurelia would have sworn wasn't there a moment before. Beyond was another world entirely. The corridor stretched further than should have been possible, lit by candles in iron sconces that must have been original to whenever this place was built. The walls were stone, ancient and solid, carved with symbols Aurelia didn't recognize. As they walked, the sounds of the city above faded entirely, replaced by music that sounded like it came from another century. The restaurant, when they reached it, was magnificent. High ceilings with chandeliers dripping crystal, tables set with silver and fine china, and patrons who were all unmistakably vampires. White skin, pale hair in shades from platinum to silver to the faint cream of old ivory, eyes that reflected the candlelight like cats. Everyone was dressed formally, and Aurelia was suddenly glad she'd worn her best dress. The moment they entered, every eye turned to them, to Oisin specifically, and then to her at his side. She felt the weight of their attention like a physical thing, assessment and curiosity and surprise all mixed together. Oisin's hand tightened on her arm, possessive and protective. "This is Aurelia Sinclair," he announced to the room, his voice carrying with the kind of authority that expected obedience. "She is under my personal protection. Anyone who harms or distresses her will answer to me directly." The threat in his words was unmistakable, and Aurelia felt a flutter of nervousness and something else, something darker and more thrilling. This was what he'd been trying to warn her about. This was Oisin as king, not just the lonely man she'd found in the rain. A man approached them, tall and elegant with white hair pulled back in a braid. "Your Majesty," he said, bowing slightly. "We're honored by your presence, and by your companions. Please, your usual table is prepared." They were led to a private alcove separated from the main room by velvet curtains. Once they were seated, Oisin visibly relaxed, though his eyes kept scanning the room beyond their curtained refuge. "I'm sorry," he said. "I should have prepared you better. My presence here is significant, And bringing a human is unprecedented. They're not hostile, just surprised. You called me your companion, Aurelia said. Is that like a vampire girlfriend? Oisin's mouth quirked. It's like someone I'm publicly declaring my interest in. In our culture, that's not done lightly. It means I'm claiming you as mine to protect, that any insult to you is an insult to me. It's the first step toward something more permanent if we both choose it. And if I don't want to be claimed? Aurelia asked, though her heart was racing with something that wasn't quite fear. Then I'll make a public retraction and apologize for my presumption, Oisin said seriously. I meant what I said earlier, Aurelia. You always have a choice. I'm powerful enough that I can protect you from anyone except me, and I'm choosing not to be a threat. If you want to leave right now, I'll take you home and never contact you again. Aurelia thought about it, really considered her options. She could walk away from this, go back to her normal life of night shifts and small apartment and safe, boring existence. Or she could stay with the vampire king who looked at her like she was the answer to a question he'd been asking for 3,000 years. I don't want to leave, she said. But I need you to understand something. I'm not good at being claimed or protected or treated like I'm fragile. I'm a trauma nurse. I deal with emergencies and death and chaos every night. I'm strong, Oisin. I need you to see that. I do see it, he said, reaching across the table to take her hand. I saw it the moment you walked toward me in the rain instead of running away. You're the strongest person I've met in centuries, Aurelia. I don't want to diminish that. I want to celebrate it. A server appeared with menus and wine, both of which were clearly high-end. Aurelia studied the menu and realized she couldn't read half of it because it was in languages she didn't speak. Order for me, she asked Oisin. Something you think I'd like. He did, conversing with the server in what sounded like French, though the accent was older than any French Aurelia had heard before. When the server left, Oisin explained, I ordered you a dish that's been popular in Paris for about 200 years. It's rich but not heavy, and pairs well with the wine I selected. Trust me? I'm sitting in a vampire restaurant in a secret underground city with a 3,000-year-old king, Aurelia said. I think we're past the point where trust is a question. Dinner was extraordinary, both the food and the conversation. Oisin told her stories about his long life, the places he'd seen and the people he'd known. He talked about watching empires rise and fall, about the strange beauty of seeing history repeat itself in new forms, about the loneliness of loving mortal things when you yourself couldn't die. Aurelia told him about her life, which felt absurdly small in comparison, but which he listened to with the same attention he'd probably given to centuries of politics and warfare. She talked about nursing school, about why she'd chosen trauma care, about her family and her few close friends, and the strange satisfaction of saving lives even when the job was exhausting and heartbreaking. You do the same thing I do, Oisin observed. You protect people, you fight against death. The methods are different, but the core purpose is the same. Except I use medicine and you use violence, Aurelia pointed out. Sometimes, he acknowledged, but I also use law, diplomacy, structure. I've spent 3,000 years building systems that keep my people safe. The violence is a last resort, I promise you. I'm not a monster, Aurelia, even though I could be. I choose not to be every single day. I believe you, she said. And she did. After dinner, Oisin took her deeper into the underground city, showing her the parts of his world that no human had seen in decades. They walked through galleries lined with art that belonged in museums, libraries filled with books that predated printing presses, gardens somehow thriving without sunlight, where night-blooming flowers filled the air with perfume. This is beautiful, Aurelia breathed, standing in a courtyard with a fountain carved from black marble. How is any of this possible? Magic, Oisin said simply. Old magic, woven into the foundations when this place was built. It sustains the plants, maintains the temperature, keeps everything hidden from the world above. We've had centuries to perfect it. Do you use magic? Aurelia asked. Some. All vampires have certain abilities: strength, speed, enhanced senses, the power to compel weaker minds. Kings have more. I can manipulate shadows, sense life forces from a distance, heal faster than most. Nothing too dramatic. but enough to maintain authority. They ended up in what Oisin called his private quarters, which was like calling Versailles a house. The rooms were vast and ornate, all carved stone and rich fabrics and furniture that looked priceless because it probably was, but despite the grandeur, it felt cold, empty, like a museum exhibit of how a king should live rather than an actual home. "You were right," Oisin said, watching her take in the space. "It's lonely. I have servants and subjects and advisors, but no one I can just exist with, no one who sees past the crown." Aurelia walked to him and took both his hands in hers. "I see you, Oisin. I see the lonely man in the rain and the king in his palace and everything in between. And I want to keep seeing you, if you'll let me." His answer was to kiss her, gentle and questioning and full of 3,000 years of longing. Aurelia kissed him back, rising on her toes to wrap her arms around his neck, and felt something slot into place in her chest like a puzzle piece she hadn't known was missing. When they finally broke apart, both breathless even though only one of them technically needed air, Oisin rested his forehead against hers and whispered, "I've been waiting for you my entire immortal life. I didn't know it until I saw you in the rain, but I've been waiting for someone who would see me as just Oisin. Thank you for finding me." "Thank you for letting me help you," Aurelia replied. She stayed with him until just before dawn, talking and kissing and existing in the small, perfect bubble of new love. When the sky began to lighten, Oisin personally escorted her back to the surface, kissing her goodbye at the door to her building like a normal man at the end of a normal date. "When can I see you again?" he asked, echoing her words from the diner. "Tomorrow night?" Aurelia suggested. "I have the next 3 days off. We could spend actual time together instead of stolen hours between sunset and sunrise." "I'll clear my schedule," Oisin promised. Kings have that privilege occasionally. Their relationship developed fast after that, compressed by the intensity of their connection and the limited hours they had together. Oisin would arrive at sunset and stay until just before dawn, and they'd fill those hours with everything from deep conversations to simple domesticity. He helped her cook dinner even though he didn't need to eat. She read to him from books she loved while he lay with his head in her lap. They watched movies and argued about historical accuracy and made love with a tenderness that made Aurelia's chest ache. 3 weeks in, Oisin started teaching her about vampire politics, explaining the complex web of courts and alliances that governed his world. There were 5 major courts in North America alone, each with its own territory and ruler. Oisin's court controlled the eastern seaboard, a vast network of cities and territories that required constant maintenance and diplomacy. "There's tension right now," he explained one night while they were curled up on her couch. "The Western Court has a new king, younger and more aggressive than his predecessor. He's been pushing boundaries, testing to see how much he can expand his territory. I've been handling it with diplomacy, but it's getting more difficult." "What happens if diplomacy fails?" Aurelia asked, though she suspected she knew the answer. "War," Oisin said simply. "Though we try to avoid it. Vampire wars are devastating. We heal quickly, but we're not invulnerable, and losing immortal citizens is felt more keenly than you might think. Every death is permanent in a way that matters when you've had centuries to know each person." "Can I help somehow?" Aurelia asked. Oisin smiled and kissed her temple. "You help by being here, by giving me a reason to come home that has nothing to do with duty or responsibility. You're my peace, Aurelia." But peace didn't last long in vampire politics. A month into their relationship, Oisin arrived at Aurelia's apartment 3 hours after sunset, which was unusual. He looked tense, his jaw tight and his eyes harder than she'd seen since that first night in the rain. "What's wrong?" she asked immediately. "The Western King made his move," Oisin said. "He attacked one of my outposts tonight, killed 3 of my people. It's a formal declaration of hostility. What are you going to do?" "Respond," he said grimly. "I'm king. I protect my people. That means showing strength when we're attacked." "That means violence," Aurelia said. "Yes," Oisin admitted. "I'm sorry. I promised you no executions while we were together, but this is different. This is war, and I can't ask my people to fight without leading them myself." Aurelia took a deep breath, processing. When do you leave? Dawn, he said. I'll be gone for a few days, maybe a week. It depends on how quickly we can resolve this. He moved closer, cupping her face in his cool hands. I need you to understand something. I'm going to do violent things. I'm going to kill people who are trying to kill my subjects. I'm going to be the monster that humans fear, but I'll come back to you if you'll still have me. I'll still have you, Aurelia said. I knew what you were when I washed blood off your face that first night. I'm not afraid of your violence, Oisin. I'm afraid of losing you. You won't, he promised. I've survived 3,000 years. I can survive a border skirmish with an overconfident young king. They spent that night wrapped around each other, desperate and tender at once. When dawn came, Oisin kissed her goodbye like he was memorizing the taste of her, and then he was gone, disappearing into the underground to prepare for war. The week he was gone was the longest of Aurelia's life. She worked her shifts at the hospital and tried not to think about what Oisin was doing, what he was fighting, whether he was safe. She'd given him her heart so quickly, so completely, and now she was faced with the reality that loving someone immortal didn't mean they couldn't die. On the 6th day, her phone rang at 3 a.m, not a text, an actual call, which Oisin never did. Aurelia answered with her heart in her throat. I'm alive, Oisin said immediately. I'm coming to you. I need you, Aurelia. Where are you? She asked, already grabbing her keys. The place where you found me, he said. The hospital parking lot. I couldn't go anywhere else. Aurelia ran through empty streets, her breath fogging in the cold air, and found him standing in exactly the same spot he'd been that first night. And just like that first night, he was covered in blood. But this time, she could see that some of it was his. Oh, God, she breathed, running to him. What happened? We won, Oisin said, his voice rough. The Western king surrendered, but it was close, too close. I'm healing, but it's slow. I'm tired, Aurelia. 3,000 years, and I've never felt this tired. She guided him inside through the staff entrance again, back to the same bathroom they'd used before. But this time, when she started cleaning the blood from his face, she could see the exhaustion in every line of his body. He slumped against the sink, like standing was taking all his remaining strength. Tell me where you're hurt, Aurelia said, her nurse training overriding her fear. Everywhere, Oisin admitted. Nothing fatal, but nothing comfortable either. Silver blades which slow healing. I'll be fine in a few days, but right now I feel like I'm dying all over again. Aurelia worked methodically, cleaning his face and neck just like she had before, then helping him out of his shredded shirt to assess the damage beneath. His torso was a mess of cuts and bruises, already healing but still angry and raw. This is going to hurt, she warned, reaching for antiseptic. I know, Oisin said. I trust you. She cleaned his wounds with the same steady hands she used on human patients, ignoring his occasional hisses of pain. When she was done, he looked less like he'd walked off a battlefield, though the exhaustion remained. Come home with me, Aurelia said. You need rest, and you're not going to get it in your palace with people demanding updates and decisions. Come home with me and let me take care of you. Something in Oisin's expression crumbled. You still want me, even after what I've done this week? Especially after, Aurelia said firmly. You protected your people, you did your duty, and now you need someone to protect you for a change. Let me be that person, Oisin. He nodded, too tired to argue, and let her lead him back to her apartment as dawn was breaking. She closed all the curtains and blinds, blocking out every trace of sunlight, and then she helped him into her bed. He was asleep before his head hit the pillow, curled on his side like he was trying to make himself small. Aurelia called in sick to work, then climbed into bed beside him and wrapped herself around his back, offering comfort in the only way she knew how. He stirred slightly in his sleep, reaching back to pull her closer, and whispered something in a language she didn't understand. She stayed with him all day while he slept, only leaving the bed for quick trips to the bathroom or to get water. When he finally woke as the sun was setting, he looked better, the worst of his wounds already faded to faint scars. You stayed, he said, sounding surprised. Where else would I be? Aurelia asked. Oisin pulled her down for a kiss that tasted like gratitude and relief, and something deeper that neither of them had said out loud yet. When they broke apart, he said, "I love you. I know it's too soon and too much, but I've had 3,000 years to understand what love feels like, and this is it. You're it, Aurelia." "I love you too," she said, the words easy and true. "I've loved you since you let me wash blood off your face, since you looked at me like I was offering you the world instead of a paper towel." They spent the evening in bed, not making love, but simply existing together, talking about the battle and his fears, and her week of worry. Oisin described the Western King's surrender, how the young vampire had been more bluster than substance, dangerous but not experienced enough to actually threaten an ancient king's territory. "It's done now," he said. "Peace is restored, at least for a while. These things tend to be cyclical. Someone will challenge again eventually, but probably not for a few decades." "Decades," Aurelia repeated. "I don't have decades. I have maybe 50 or 60 years if I'm lucky." The words hung between them, the unspoken issue they'd been avoiding since the beginning. Oisin was immortal. Aurelia was human. Their expiration date was built into their biology. "I know," Oisin said quietly. "I think about it every time I look at you. You're going to age and I'm not. You're going to die and I'm going to keep living. Unless you choose differently." Aurelia's breath caught. "You mean turning me?" "I would never do it without your consent," Oisin said quickly. "And I'm not asking you to decide now, but it's an option if you want it. If you want forever with me, I can give you that." "What if I don't want to be a vampire?" Aurelia asked. Pain flashed across his face, but he said, "Then I'll love you for however long you'll have me, and I'll mourn you when you're gone, and I'll spend the rest of eternity grateful I got to know you at all." Tears pricked Aurelia's eyes. "I need time to think about it. Becoming a vampire, giving up the sun, living on blood, all of it. That's a huge decision." "Take all the time you need," Oisin said. "I've waited 3,000 years for you. I can wait however long you need to figure out what you want." They fell into a routine after that, a relationship that existed in the space between her mortality and his immortality. Oisin would arrive at sunset and stay until dawn, and they'd fill those hours with the kind of intimacy that comes from knowing time is limited. Aurelia worked her shifts at the hospital, saved lives, came home exhausted, and found peace in Oisin's arms. 6 months in, he asked her to move into his palace. "You'd have your own space," he promised. "Rooms that no one else can enter, complete privacy, but you'd be safe there, protected. And I'd get to see you more than just the hours between sunset and dawn." Aurelia thought about it seriously. Her apartment was small and aging, and the neighborhood wasn't great. The idea of living in an underground palace with a vampire king was absurd, but no more absurd than anything else about their relationship. "Okay," she said, "but I need to be able to come and go freely. I can't be trapped underground even if it's beautiful down there." "Of course," Oisin said. "You're not a prisoner, Aurelia. You're my partner. You have complete freedom." Moving in was surreal. Oisin gave her an entire suite of rooms connected to his private quarters, decorated in a style that blended the modern comforts she was used to with the old-world elegance he preferred. There was a bedroom with a bed big enough for 4 people, a sitting room with bookshelves and comfortable furniture, and a bathroom that looked like something from a luxury spa. "This is insane," Aurelia said, staring at what was now her home. "This is what you deserve," Oisin corrected. "I've had 3,000 years to accumulate wealth. Let me spend some of it on you." Living in the vampire court was an adjustment. Aurelia had to learn the social structures, the etiquette, the careful dance of vampire politics. Oisin's subjects treated her with cautious respect, uncertain how to interact with their king's human companion. But slowly, over weeks and months, she found her place. She started helping in the court's medical facilities, because apparently vampires needed doctors too, even if their healing was accelerated. She treated injuries from training accidents and political altercations, learned about vampire physiology, made friends with the healers who'd been doing this work for centuries. One of them, a vampire woman named Isolde, who'd been turned during the Renaissance, took Aurelia under her wing. "You're good at this," Isolde observed one night while they were stitching up a guard who'd been injured in a sparring match. Natural healer instincts. You'd make an excellent vampire physician if you chose to turn. That's a big if, Aurelia said. But you're thinking about it, Isolde said. It wasn't a question. Every day, Aurelia admitted. I love him, Isolde. I love him so much it terrifies me. But giving up the sun, giving up my humanity, that's not a small thing. No, Isolde agreed. It's not. But neither is loving someone for eternity. Only you can decide if the trade is worth it. That night, lying in bed with Oisin's arms around her, Aurelia said, Tell me the truth. What's it like being a vampire? Not the politics or the power, just the day-to-day existence. Oisin was quiet for a moment, thinking. It's beautiful and lonely at once, he said finally. You see the world change around you, watch humanity evolve, experience things that most people can't imagine, but you also lose people constantly. Everyone you love who stays human will die, and you'll keep living. It's a trade-off, power and immortality in exchange for a different kind of mortality. You don't die physically, but you can die inside if you're not careful. Are you dying inside? Aurelia asked softly. I was, Oisin said. Before you. I was going through the motions of existence without really living. You brought me back, Aurelia. You reminded me why immortality could be a gift instead of a curse. I'm scared, she confessed. Scared of losing myself, scared of making the wrong choice, scared of living forever or not living long enough. I don't know what to do. Oisin kissed her forehead. Then don't decide yet. We have time. Not infinite time, but enough. Live your human life. Love me in whatever way works for you, and when you're ready to make a choice, I'll support whatever you decide. 9 months into their relationship, the decision was taken out of her hands. Aurelia was walking home from the hospital after a particularly brutal shift. She'd stayed late to help with a multi-car pileup, and dawn was already breaking by the time she emerged into the cold morning air. She was exhausted and not paying attention, which was why she didn't notice the men following her until it was too late. They grabbed her in an alley 2 blocks from the entrance to Oisin's court. 3 human men wearing symbols she vaguely recognized from vampire politics. One of them shoved a cloth over her mouth before she could scream, and the world went dark. She woke up in a basement somewhere, tied to a chair with rough rope that burned her wrists. The 3 men were standing nearby, and now she could see their symbols clearly, the mark of the Western Court, the young vampire king that Oisin had defeated months ago. You're awake, one of them said. Good. We need you conscious for this to work. What do you want? Aurelia asked, proud that her voice didn't shake. We want King Kadmiel to suffer, the man said. He humiliated our king, killed our brothers. We can't touch him directly, but we can hurt what he loves. You're his weakness, human, his soft spot. Fear turned her blood cold, but Aurelia forced herself to think. Oisin will kill you for this. You know that, right? You've signed your own death warrants. We'll be martyrs, another man said. Our king will honor our sacrifice. Your king surrendered, Aurelia pointed out. He made peace. This breaks that peace. You're not martyrs, you're just stupid. That got her a backhand across the face hard enough to split her lip. She tasted blood and thought about Oisin, about how he'd react when he found out she'd been taken. He'd be devastating, unstoppable. These men had no idea what they'd unleashed. How long until sunset? She asked, because if she could stall them until Oisin woke, she might survive this. 6 hours, one of the men said. Plenty of time to do what we need to do. They hurt her systematically after that, nothing immediately fatal but painful enough that Aurelia had to bite back screams. She thought about her training, about trauma patients she'd treated, about survival rates and injury patterns. She thought about anything except the pain. She must have passed out at some point because the next thing she knew, the basement was full of shadows that were moving wrong, twisting and coiling like living things. Through the darkness, she heard screaming that wasn't hers, wet sounds that she recognized from the emergency room as the sound of bodies being torn apart. Then Oisin was there, his face a mask of cold fury. blood on his hands that definitely wasn't his own this time. He killed the last man while Aurelia watched, quick and brutal, and absolutely merciless. When it was done, he turned to her, and his expression shattered into something anguished. "Aurelia," he breathed, crossing the room in an instant to start untying her. "I'm sorry, I'm so sorry. I should have protected you better. I should have had guards on you. This is my fault." "Not your fault," Aurelia managed through split lips. "Just heal me. Please. It hurts." "I can't heal you," Oisin said, and there were tears in his ancient eyes. "Not like this. Not without turning you. Vampire blood can heal wounds, but only if you're already one of us. If I give you my blood now, you'll start the transformation whether you want it or not." Aurelia looked down at herself, at the damage they'd done. She was bleeding from multiple wounds, some deep enough that she could feel herself going into shock. Without vampire healing, she'd need a hospital, surgery, maybe intensive care, and even then, the recovery would be long and painful. Or she could choose the other option. "Turn me," she said. Oisin froze. "You don't have to. I can get you to a hospital. You'll survive this, I promise." "I don't want to just survive," Aurelia said. "I want to live. With you, forever. Turn me, Oisin. Make me yours in every way that matters." "Are you sure?" he asked desperately. "This is permanent, Aurelia. You'll never see the sun again. You'll never be human again. You need to be absolutely certain." "I love you," she said. "I want eternity with you. I'm sure. Please, before I lose my nerve or bleed out. Whichever comes first." Oisin kissed her forehead, then her lips, despite the blood and the pain. "This is going to hurt," he warned. "The transformation is agony. I'll be with you the entire time, but I can't make it easier." "I trust you," Aurelia said. He bit his own wrist first, let his blood well up dark and strange, and brought it to her mouth. "Drink," he said, "as much as you can." The blood tasted like metal and darkness, and something indefinable that might have been magic. Aurelia drank until Oisin pulled his wrist away, and then he bent to her throat and bit down. The pain was immediate and absolute, like her veins were filled with fire. She screamed, couldn't help it, and Oisin held her through it, whispering apologies and promises in languages she didn't understand. The transformation took hours, her human body dying cell by cell and being reborn as something else, something more. When it finally ended, Aurelia opened her eyes to a world that looked completely different. Colors were sharper, sounds were clearer, and she could hear Oisin's heartbeat even though he was standing across the room giving her space. "How do you feel?" he asked carefully. Aurelia stood up, testing her new body. The wounds were gone, healed completely. She felt strong and steady and powerful in a way she'd never experienced. "I feel incredible," she said, and her voice sounded different to her own ears, richer somehow. "Is this what you feel like all the time?" "Welcome to immortality," Oisin said softly. "You're one of us now." The first few weeks of vampire life were an adjustment. Aurelia had to learn to control her new strength so she didn't accidentally break things, had to get used to the enhanced senses that made the world overwhelming sometimes. She had to learn to hunt, to feed, to navigate the reality of needing blood to survive. Oisin was patient through all of it, teaching her everything she needed to know. He took her hunting in the parts of the city where humans wouldn't be missed or where criminals operated, showed her how to feed without killing, how to compel humans to forget they'd ever seen her. "You're a natural," he said one night after she'd successfully fed from a willing donor without taking too much or causing damage. "It took me decades to develop that kind of control." "I had a good teacher," Aurelia said, leaning into his embrace. "And I don't want to be a monster. I want to be a vampire who still cares about human life." "You can be," Oisin promised. "I am. Most of us are. The monsters are the exception, not the rule." The hardest part was giving up the sun. Aurelia hadn't realized how much she'd missed daylight until she couldn't have it anymore. She stood at a window one dawn with the curtains drawn, feeling the sun rise beyond the glass, and cried for what she'd lost. Oisin found her there and held her while she mourned. "I'm sorry," he said. "I would give you the sun if I could." "I know," Aurelia said. "I don't regret this. I love you and I want forever with you, but I'm allowed to miss the sun." "You are," he agreed. "I've missed it for 3,000 years. We can miss it together." 6 months after her transformation, Aurelia was fully adjusted to vampire life. She'd taken a position as the court's head physician, using her medical knowledge to help her people in ways that felt meaningful. She and Oisin had settled into their immortal life together, partners in every sense of the word. One night, he took her to the surface to a park she used to visit as a human. It was empty this late, just the two of them and the stars overhead. "I have something for you," Oisin said, pulling a small box from his pocket. Aurelia's heart, which technically didn't beat the same way anymore, still managed to jump. "Is that what I think it is?" "Probably," he said, opening the box to reveal a ring with a stone that looked like captured moonlight. "I know we're already bound in every way that matters. You're vampire now, part of my court, my partner in ruling. But I want the human tradition too. I want to marry you, Aurelia. I want you to be my wife in addition to my queen." "Yes," she said immediately. "Yes, absolutely yes." Oisin slipped the ring onto her finger and kissed her under the stars, and Aurelia thought about how strange life was. A year ago, she'd been a trauma nurse working night shifts and living alone. Now, she was an immortal vampire queen, engaged to a 3,000-year-old king, and she'd never been happier. They were married a month later in a ceremony that blended vampire traditions with human ones. The entire court attended. Hundreds of vampires gathered in the great hall beneath the city to witness their king take a queen. Aurelia wore white even though it was her second life, not her first, and Oisin wore formal attire that looked like it came from a dozen different centuries all at once. Isolde officiated, speaking in the old language that all vampires learned, binding them together with words and magic and witnessed oaths. When it was done, when they'd exchanged rings and promises and kissed to seal their union, the court erupted in celebration. "My queen," Oisin said, his forehead pressed to hers. "My love, my eternity." "My king," Aurelia replied. "My partner, my choice." They ruled together after that, king and queen of the Eastern Court. Aurelia brought changes to the old ways, insisting on better treatment for turned vampires who were still adjusting, establishing programs to help those who struggled with immortality. She made the court more compassionate without making it weak, and Oisin supported her in everything. 20 years passed, then 50, then a century. Aurelia watched the world change from her underground palace, saw technology advance, and society shift in ways that still sometimes surprised her. She and Oisin traveled when they could, seeing the world together in the hours between sunset and dawn. They faced challenges, of course. Other vampire courts that tested their borders, human hunters who discovered their existence, internal politics that required careful navigation, but they faced everything together, united in their love and their purpose. One night, exactly 100 years after they'd met, Oisin took Aurelia back to the hospital parking lot where she'd found him in the rain. "Do you remember?" he asked. "Every detail," Aurelia said. "You were covered in blood and looking lost, and I offered to help you." "You offered me everything," Oisin corrected. "You saw a monster in the rain and decided to show him kindness. You changed my entire immortal existence, Aurelia. You gave me a reason to want eternity." "You gave me eternity," she countered. "You loved me enough to turn me, to teach me, to make me your equal instead of your possession. You gave me power and purpose and forever." "We gave each other everything," Oisin said. "That's what love is." They stood in the parking lot where their story had begun. King and queen, vampire and vampire, two immortal souls who'd found each other against impossible odds. Above them, the stars wheeled in patterns that would continue long after humanity ended, and they would be there to see it. Together, always together. "I love you," Aurelia said. "For eternity." "I love you," Oisin replied, "for every moment of that eternity." They kissed in the rain that had started to fall, just like that first night a century ago, and then they went home to their kingdom beneath the city. To their people who needed them, to their life that they'd built together, to their forever that had started with blood and rain and a simple act of kindness. Aurelia had washed the vampire king clean, and in return, he'd given her the world. It was more than a fair trade. It was everything she'd never known she wanted, and everything she'd spend eternity grateful to have found. Their story wasn't finished. Immortal lives don't have endings, just continuations. But this chapter was complete, this part of their tale told. They'd faced violence and choice and transformation, had fought through pain to find joy, had chosen each other over and over again until choice became permanent. In the underground palace, in the rooms they shared, Oisin held Aurelia close and thought about the night he'd stood in the rain covered in blood, certain he would spend eternity alone. He thought about the human woman who'd approached him with kindness instead of fear, who'd washed his face and seen him as a person instead of a monster. He thought about how she'd saved him in ways that had nothing to do with medicine or nursing, how she'd pulled him back from the edge of an isolation he hadn't even realized was killing him slowly. How she'd loved him enough to choose his world over her own, to give up the sun so they could have forever. Aurelia, pressed against his chest, thought about similar things, about the vampire king who'd let her see his vulnerability, who'd loved her with a ferocity that spanned millennia, who'd made her his equal in every way that mattered, about the choice she'd made in a basement while bleeding out, the choice to become something more so she could love him properly, about how she'd never regretted it, not once in 100 years. They fell asleep as dawn broke above them, safe in their palace beneath the city, surrounded by their people and their power and, most importantly, their love. And they would wake at sunset and do it all again, for another night, another century, another eternity. Because that's what love meant when you were immortal. Not just choosing someone once, but choosing them over and over, forever, through every challenge and every change. Choosing them until choice became nature, until love became as permanent as their deathless bodies. Oisin and Aurelia had chosen each other in a rain-soaked parking lot a century ago, and they chose each other still. They would choose each other tomorrow, and the day after that, and the day after that, for as long as time had meaning. It was enough. It was everything. It was the happy ending that neither of them had believed possible until they'd found it in each other. And in the great underground palace in the city that never slept above them, a vampire king and his queen dreamed of eternity, secure in the knowledge that they would face it together, always together, forever.